All right, hello and welcome to The Explainer. Let's just get right into it. When a mass grave was recently unearthed in Sri Lanka, it wasn't just about digging up bones. It was about digging up decades of pain, anger, and just deep, deep division. And nowhere was this more explosive than online, where this one discovery created two completely different realities that honestly just cannot coexist.
Now get this. When the news broke that they'd found the remains of dozens of people, children included, this was one of the thousands of comments posted on Facebook. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Barbecue and eat those bones. It's a shocking thing to read.
So this leads us to the big question we're really digging into today. How on earth do you get to a point where the discovery of human remains turns into jokes about cannibalism? I mean, what does a reaction like that really tell us about the fractures running through a country that's trying to deal with its own history?
To even begin to understand the why, we first have to look at the what. We've got to dive into the digital battlefield where this whole thing is playing out. So our source for this explainer is a really deep analysis of over 4,000 Facebook comments, all in Sinhala, all posted in response to this news. And look, this isn't just a handful of trolls trying to get a rise out of people. This data shows us the big, dominant patterns in the online conversation. And what it reveals is a society basically at war with itself over its own story.
But okay, before we get lost in the online reaction, we need to understand the real-world event that's become the lightning rod for all this anger. So what is the story of the Chemmani grave?
Well, the story really starts back in 1996 with the absolutely horrific rape and murder of a schoolgirl named Krishanti Kumaraswamy by soldiers. Then, 2 years later, one of the soldiers convicted for that crime confesses in court. He claims to know about a mass grave nearby with hundreds of bodies in it. Now, fast forward to 2025, new excavations start at that exact spot. And sure enough, they start unearthing human remains, confirming a mass burial did happen there.
And you have to realize, Chemmani isn't some isolated incident. Sri Lanka has one of the highest numbers of unresolved enforced disappearances in the entire world. We're talking somewhere between 60 and 100,000 people. Every single one of those numbers is a family, still waiting, still wondering. This is the national trauma that's lurking under the surface of this whole firestorm. So, with that context, let's circle back to those 4,200 comments. The analysis shows this incredibly powerful dominant narrative, and it's really built on three pillars: deflecting blame, fiercely defending the military, and a deep, deep distrust of pretty much everyone involved in the investigation. The most common tactic you see, by far, is something called whataboutism. It's a classic propaganda move, right? Instead of actually talking about the discovery at Chemmani, you immediately pivot and say, yeah, but what about this other terrible thing that happened? It's just a way to completely derail the conversation. And in these comments, this just plays out as a flood of counter-accusations. Instead of discussing Chemmani, people bring up a whole list of horrific things the Tamil Tigers, the LTTE did. Massacres of monks, bus bombings. The goal here is to create this counter-narrative of suffering, to basically argue that it's unfair to even look into the army's actions when the other side did so many awful things too.
And right at the heart of all this defensiveness is this core belief, and it's stated as just absolute fact in so many comments, that the Sri Lankan military is morally perfect. They're the Ranavirwo, the war heroes, and they are seen as just incapable of committing crimes like this. So, the logic goes, if there's a mass grave, it had to have been the LTTE's work. Period. This defensive thinking then spirals into this huge conspiracy theory. The whole investigation gets reframed as a war hero hunt or a political drama. And who's pulling the strings? Well, the comments point to this whole coalition of enemies: the Tamil diaspora, foreign-funded NGOs, skeeving politicians, and of course, the international community.
In this mindset, this is what leads to the most disturbing part of all: the dehumanization. See, when you start believing the victims are just pawns in a plot against your country, it gets a lot easier to post comments like this one. The human remains are no longer human. They're reduced to something you'd just give to an animal. It's a total erasure of their humanity, which makes their suffering completely irrelevant. But that's not the only story here. It's the dominant one, for sure. But buried in those thousands of comments, there is a smaller but very clear counter-narrative. It's a minority voice, yeah, but it's one that's calling for something totally different: universal justice. This quote just nails it. The commenters here are making this really powerful distinction. They're arguing that, hey, You can support the military's role in winning a war while also demanding that people be held accountable for war crimes. They completely reject the idea that one bad act justifies another. They just want one standard of justice for everyone.
And what's crucial is that these voices aren't just appealing to emotion. They are bringing the receipts. They're citing specific historical evidence. They keep bringing up that original 1998 court case and the confession of Corporal Somaratna Rajapaksa, the soldier who blew the whistle in the first place. They're using facts to push back against that narrative of a perfect, infallible military.
So what we're left with are these two completely opposed narratives, spinning out from the exact same event. And they're not just different interpretations. They are fundamentally different realities, coexisting on the same island and just smashing into each other on social media.
This table just lays the divide out so clearly. In one reality, say in the English language media, the victims are grieving families who need closure. But in the other reality, in these comments, they're abstract enemies you can mock. In one reality, the government has the political will for justice. In the other, they're traitors. The investigation is either a scientific search for truth or it's a total political fraud. I mean, both of these versions of reality just can't be true at the same time.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with a question. This whole online firestorm over the Chemmani bones shows us a society that can't even agree on what a bone is. Is it a tragic human remain that cries out for justice? Or is it a political weapon to be used and mocked? And that leaves us with this massive challenge. If a society can't even agree on the basic facts of its past, how can it ever hope to build a shared future?